Jaden Carter never wanted the spotlight, but now, under the unforgiving sun and the weight of 100 watching eyes, he had no choice. The pavement beneath his cheek was rough, pressing into his skin as Officer Connor's knee dug into his back. His wrists ached against the cold steel of the handcuffs, but that pain was nothing compared to the humiliation burning in his chest. "I'm not resisting," he said through gritted teeth, his breath ragged. Connors smirked above him, the weight of authority heavy in his posture. "That's what they all say." Chris and Malik stood frozen nearby, their hands raised, their eyes darting between their best friend and the crowd forming around them. "He didn't do anything," Malik's voice cracked, filled with rage he knew better than to act on. Chris shook his head, his phone gripped tightly in his trembling fingers. "We need to call his dad." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, uneasy. Phones were out, cameras recording, documenting every second of the injustice unfolding. A woman in the crowd shook her head. "That boy ain't done a thing." Another man, an older gentleman in a business suit, muttered, "They always find an excuse." Jaden squeezed his eyes shut, trying to breathe through the weight of it all. He knew what this was. He had felt it his entire life. Money didn't change the way people saw him. Connors yanked him to his feet, gripping his arm so tightly it would bruise. "You think you can walk into any store you want, huh? Think you belong in places like that?" Jaden lifted his gaze, anger swirling behind his calm expression. "I do belong," Connors scoffed. "Yeah, and why's that?" Jaden straightened, his voice firm despite the handcuffs digging into his wrists. "Because my father is Daniel Carter." For a moment, the officer hesitated. That name carried weight, even if Connors didn't recognize it yet. But then he laughed, shaking his head. "Oh yeah? Your daddy gonna come bail you out, huh?" He shoved Jaden toward the police car. "You kids always got some story." Jaden felt the world closing in around him. He had seen this happen to other people. He had watched videos just like the one being recorded now. But now it was happening to him. The officer pushed him into the back seat of the squad car. Through the rolled-down window, Malik shouted, "Jaden, we're calling him. Your dad's gonna—" Connors slammed the door shut, cutting off the sound. Jaden exhaled sharply. This officer had no idea who he just messed with. Jaden sat stiffly in the back of the squad car, his wrists still throbbing from the too tight handcuffs. The officers in the front ignored him, laughing among themselves as if he wasn't even there. The engine hummed, the city moving past him, but inside the car, it felt like time had stopped. He was no longer Jaden Carter, the son of a billionaire. He was just another black kid under arrest. The police station was buzzing with activity as Jaden was pulled inside. The officer at the desk barely glanced at him before nodding at Connors. "What's the charge?" the officer asked. Connors smirked. "Shoplifting. Resisting arrest." Jaden scoffed, shaking his head. "I didn't resist." Connors squeezed his arm tighter, leaning down slightly. "You're lucky I didn't charge you with assault." The officer at the desk scribbled something down, then motioned to the holding cells. "Take him in." Jaden was shoved forward, the air thick with the smell of sweat and cheap disinfectant. The cell door clanked shut behind him, sealing him in a cold, cramped space with 3 other men. 2 sleeping on the bench, another sitting in the corner. Staring at the floor, Jaden sat down carefully, his breathing shallow. He knew he wasn't supposed to be here. But the longer he sat, the more he realized something unsettling. No one else in that cell seemed surprised to see him. The man in the corner finally looked up. He was older, his face lined with experience, his eyes heavy with something that looked like knowing. "You thought you was different, huh?" the man said, his voice rough, tired. Jaden didn't answer. The man chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "They don't care about your last name, boy. We all the same to them." Jaden clenched his fists. He knew it was true. And that realization made his stomach twist. Somewhere across the city, Daniel Carter sat in a high-rise boardroom, his focus sharp, his voice commanding as he discussed an upcoming merger. His company was on the verge of closing a billion-dollar deal, one that would cement his empire's legacy. But the moment his assistant burst into the room, her face pale, her voice urgent, everything changed. Sir, it's Jaden. He's been arrested. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. The room faded. The voices of his executives became white noise. For a long moment he just stared, absorbing the words. Then his voice, low and firm, cut through the silence. Cancel the meeting. His assistant hesitated. But sir, the deal. Cancel. It, Daniel repeated, already reaching for his phone. Clear my schedule. We're handling this now. The police station buzzed with confusion as the black SUVs pulled up outside. Inside, officers whispered among themselves, their gazes shifting toward the entrance as the station doors swung open. Daniel Carter walked in, his stride purposeful, his expression unreadable. Flanked by 3 attorneys, he didn't slow, didn't glance at the officers staring at him. He moved like a storm rolling in, all quiet control and barely contained fury. The desk sergeant straightened, adjusting his belt as he cleared his throat. Can I help you? Daniel's voice was steady, but his presence alone sent chills. Through the room, where is my son? The sergeant swallowed, his posture stiffening. Who is your son, sir? Jaden Carter, Daniel said, his gaze locked onto the man. You arrested him less than an hour ago. The sergeant's face paled. Daniel turned his head slightly and Connors, standing near the back, froze. You, Daniel said, his voice cold. Connors swallowed, his bravado from earlier nowhere to be found. You just put your hands on my son. Daniel continued, stepping toward him. I hope you know exactly what that means. Connors opened his mouth, searching for words. It was a misunderstanding. No. Daniel cut him off, his eyes narrowing. It was profiling. Connors' lips pressed together tightly, but his silence spoke volumes. The shift in power was immediate. The officer who had been so sure of himself hours ago now looked trapped. The officers scrambled to justify the arrest. It was standard. Procedure, one muttered. Daniel turned to his head attorney. Get the body cam footage and the security footage from the store. Moments later, the videos played on a screen. The truth was undeniable. Jaden never stole anything. Never resisted. Daniel turned to the police chief, his tone controlled but sharp. So tell me, he said, tilting his head slightly. How do you plan to explain this? Silence filled the room. Jaden was released, but the damage was done. He rubbed his wrists, still red from the cuffs. Daniel reached for his shoulder, protective, but Jaden stepped away. You fixed this for me, Jaden said, his voice quiet but heavy. But what about the kids who don't have you? Daniel froze. His son's words hit deeper than he expected. Jaden looked at him, the weight of everything sitting between them. You can't fix racism, Dad, he said. No matter how much money you have. For the first time in a long time, Daniel had no response, and that silence said everything. The weight of what happened still lingered in Jaden's chest. Even after being released, after stepping out of the police station into the flashing lights of cameras and the waiting arms of his father, he couldn't shake the feeling. The cuffs were gone, but the invisible chains still clung to him. His name, his wealth. None of it had mattered when he was on that pavement, face down, treated like nothing. Daniel stood beside him, rigid with controlled fury. His legal team flanked him, already speaking in hushed, urgent tones about the next steps, but Jaden barely heard them. His thoughts ran in circles, the memory of Connor's smirk, the disbelief in his voice, the way the officers had laughed when he said his father's name. We're suing them, Daniel said finally, his voice sharp, decisive. We're not letting them bury this. Jaden looked up at him, his jaw tightening. It's not just about me. Daniel's expression flickered. Jaden, I know. No, Dad, Jaden interrupted, stepping forward. You can fight this with lawyers, with money. But what about all the kids who don't have you? Who don't have someone who can walk in and shut the whole place down? Daniel exhaled, glancing away for a brief moment before nodding. Then, we fight for them too. The lawsuit was filed within days. Wrongful arrest, racial profiling, excessive force. It didn't just target Officer Connors, but the entire system that had allowed him to operate unchecked for years. News outlets picked up the case almost immediately, splitting the country down the middle. On one side, Daniel Carter was hailed as a father who refused to let the system victimize his son, a man using his influence to push for real change. On the other, he was accused of weaponizing his wealth, of declaring war on law enforcement. Billionaire turns courtroom into a battlefield. One headline read, "The left's new attack on our cops," another spat. Social media erupted. Protesters took to the streets, holding signs with Jaden's face with the words, "We see you." On live TV, a former officer scoffed at the accusations. This is just another case of the rich getting special treatment. They think because they have money, they can ruin a good cop's career. Jaden turned off the television, shaking his head. "Good cop?" he muttered under his breath. But the tide was shifting. The footage of his arrest leaked, spreading across the internet like wildfire. The world saw him being slammed onto the pavement, heard Connors accusing him without cause, witnessed how quickly force had been used on an unarmed black teenager. Connors, once so confident, now found himself cornered. Under the pressure of national outrage, the NYPD placed him on leave, but the police union rushed to his defense. He was just doing his job, their spokesperson insisted on air. It's standard procedure. That defense fell apart when investigative reporters uncovered a pattern of racial profiling in Connors' record. Dozens of young black men arrested under suspicious circumstances. Excessive force complaints swept under the rug. Jaden sat in the living room as the news played the report, his fists clenching. "This isn't just about him," he said. "It's all of them." Protests outside the precinct grew. People demanded more than just Connors being fired. They wanted systemic change. Under the heat of scrutiny, the NYPD terminated Connors, but they refused to acknowledge fault. The police chief's statement was generic, distant. "The officer involved is no longer with the department. We remain committed to serving the community." Jaden scoffed. "That's it? No apology, no responsibility?" Daniel shook his head. "They want this to go away." "We can't let them," Jaden said. For the first time since the arrest, Jaden knew exactly what he needed to do. The press conference was packed. Journalists filled the room, cameras flashing, microphones angled toward him. He took a steady breath, stepping forward. "I've heard people say I was lucky," he started. "That things worked out for me because I have a father who could fight for me. And that's true, I was lucky." He let the words settle before continuing. "But luck shouldn't determine whether or not a black kid survives an encounter with police. Luck shouldn't be the reason I'm standing here instead of sitting in a jail cell or worse." The room was silent. "I know there are thousands of kids out there who don't have a billionaire father, who don't have cameras watching, who don't have the world paying attention when they're arrested for no reason. That's why we're here. That's why we're fighting." His voice didn't waver. "This isn't just about me. It's about justice for every kid who never got their chance to speak." His words echoed far beyond that room. They rippled across the nation, igniting a larger conversation on race, privilege, and police accountability. Jaden walked off the stage knowing one thing for sure. He had finally found his voice. And he wasn't done using it. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the city. The NYPD scrambled to respond, issuing carefully worded statements about commitment to reform and reviewing policies. But Jaden saw through it. Words were easy. Actions were harder. Daniel sat in his office, scrolling through news reports. His legal team had just confirmed that the department agreed to new policies on racial profiling and mandatory officer training. A win, on paper. But Jaden didn't look relieved. "They're just covering their asses," Jaden muttered, pacing the room. Daniel sighed, setting his phone down. "It's a step." Jaden shook his head. "A step? That officer was fired, but the system that let him do it? That's still standing. What happens when the next kid doesn't have cameras recording? What happens when there's no billionaire dad walking in to shut it down?" Daniel studied his son, hearing the frustration beneath the words. He had spent his whole life fighting for his family's place in a world that never wanted to give it. He had thought money could protect them, that success would keep his children from ever knowing the struggle he had endured. But racism didn't care about wealth. He exhaled slowly. "So we don't stop," Jaden frowned. What do you mean? We make sure this isn't just about you, Daniel said. We take this fight further. Daniel made the first call that night. A week later, they announced the Carter Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing legal aid for falsely accused black youth and funding investigations into profiling cases. This isn't just about what happened to my son, Daniel told reporters. It's about making sure no other kid goes through this alone. The foundation gained traction quickly. Civil rights leaders and activists joined in support. The public rallied behind the movement. Jaden's face was everywhere, on news segments, on social media, in articles titled, "The Arrest That Sparked Movement." At first, Jaden wasn't sure how he felt about it. He hadn't asked to be the face of a fight he hadn't been ready for. But then he walked into a high school auditorium, where hundreds of black teenagers looked at him with admiration. He heard their whispers as he passed. That's him. That's Jaden Carter. He's the reason people are paying attention. He stepped onto the stage. The crowd quieted. I know what it feels like, Jaden said, gripping the microphone. To think that no matter what you do, the world is going to see you the way it wants to. To feel powerless. Silence. The audience held on to his every word. But I'm standing here to tell you that we are not powerless. A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. We don't just take this. We don't just move on like it didn't happen. Jaden's voice was, we fight back and we do it together. The room erupted in applause. After the event, a young boy, no older than 10, hesitated before stepping forward. His voice was small but certain. Does this mean they won't do this to us anymore? Jaden knelt down, looking the boy in the eyes. Not if I can help it. As he stood, Jaden finally understood. This wasn't about one arrest. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure the next kid never had to feel powerless again.